last night we spent a long time covering the implications of all of the different choices that Donald Trump has thus far announced to his cabinet, many of which are predictable, many of which I think are somewhat disappointing in terms of what their historical ideology has been, although I tried to emphasize and point out that the effort to try and read into each of these appointments is, I think, very ill-advised because there's so many question marks about who will build power and how in the Trump administration. One of the choices that we covered that I think is quite positive was the choice of Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence, in part because that is such a important job when it comes to actually undermining and dismantling the most rotted, fundamentally corrupted parts of the U.S. security state. And although there are parts of Tulsi Gabbard's foreign policy that I've not always agreed with, and we've talked about it before, I've interviewed her before, in general, I consider Tulsi Gabbard an extremely smart and capable person, and most of all, she has a lot of integrity and understands how the U.S. security state has been radically corrupted in a way that a lot of other people who could be chosen for that job do not. And obviously, that's why Trump picked her as well. That's an extremely important job for Donald Trump's agenda of cleaning out the deep state, of getting rid of these faceless bureaucrats in the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, who undermine the elected representatives whenever they dislike their policy choices. A real threat to democracy is this whole secret, unaccountable world, and Tulsi Gabbard has a real chance to clean it out. And that's why, if you notice, the choices that the establishment are comfortable with, the Marco Rubios and the Elise Stefanik's and the John Ratcliffe's to run the CIA, these are not really generating any sorts of controversy at all. It's the Pete Hegseths, and especially the Matt Gaetz and the Tulsi Gabbards. And today, Trump announced that he's nominating RFK Jr. to be his Health and Human Services Secretary, which means that he will oversee the FDA and the CDC and all these other health agencies. Certainly it's going to cause a lot of uproar as well, but I would say Matt Gaetz is the one that has upset people the most, closely followed by Tulsi Gabbard. And here's Elizabeth Warren on MSNBC today trying to explain why she, Elizabeth Warren, national security expert, is so enraged at the choice of Tulsi Gabbard.
Many things I disagree with Marco Rubio on, and I haven't decided yet about voting for him, but he is qualified. He has experience. We may have differences that would cause me to say I don't think that he should be Secretary of State, and we'll go through that. We'll listen to the hearings. I want to hear very carefully from him. But what we're talking about with people like Matt Gaetz is very different from what we're talking about with people like Marco Rubio, and we just have to keep that in mind. But do understand with Matt Gaetz, and you've already made this point, he's not the only one out there who is unqualified and who raises whole questions like Tulsi Gabbard does. You really want her to have all of the secrets of the United States and our defense intelligence agencies when she has so clearly been in Putin's pocket? That just has to be a hard no.
Do you want Tulsi Gabbard to have all the secrets of the intelligence agencies when she's clearly in Putin's pocket? Accused Elizabeth Warren. Now, what is the evidence? I know none is needed, so I'm asking rhetorically. What is the evidence for Elizabeth Warren's accusation that Tulsi Gabbard has been in Putin's pocket? There is none. It's an absolutely repulsive charge, but it's so part of Democratic Party discourse that it will accuse anybody of that the minute they feel like they want to. It doesn't take, at least Joseph McCarthy, when he used to go around accusing everybody of being a Russian agent or a Kremlin sympathizer, would pretend that he had the evidence in his briefcase that he never showed. These people don't even bother pretending that, they just assert it as though it's true. And it's so interesting that Elizabeth Warren is saying, look, Marco Rubio, for all my disagreements with him, this is a serious guy. But Matt Gaetz and Tulsi Gabbard, they're just not qualified. Why? Why is that? Why is Marco Rubio, who has advocated every single war and urged and encouraged many others, in Elizabeth Warren's eye, someone who's qualified to be the Secretary of State? He's been a senator for about 14 years. So is that what it is? Okay, well, Matt Gaetz has been a congressman for 6 years. Tulsi Gabbard was a congresswoman for 6 years. She was someone who spent her life in the U.S. military. She was deployed overseas in those kinds of wars, and she was on the House Armed Services Committee and the other committees in the House that investigated foreign policy and that was responsible for it. In what way are Matt Gaetz, say, or Tulsi Gabbard unqualified for a cabinet position compared to, say, Barack Obama, who was in the U.S. Senate for 4 years before he was elected president? But what you're seeing here is that the Democratic Party is completely in bed with the Republican establishment when it comes to who they consider appropriate and who they don't. Marco Rubio, of course, they don't like Marco Rubio ideologically in some ways, but he's one of those people who they think should be chosen. Like Elise Stefanik is going to sail through, Marco Rubio is going to sail through. It's the people who are there to shake things up, which was part of Trump's primary appeal politically in 2016, 2020, and 2024, that are going to scare these people the most. And that's fine. Elizabeth Warren did not win. She ran for president. She lost. Her party ran in 2024. They got crushed. Who cares what Elizabeth Warren wants or thinks? But the fact that she would just go on the air and accuse Tulsi Gabbard of being a Russian asset despite there being no evidence, it's really something that ought to be the source of defamation lawsuits. But unfortunately, Tulsi Gabbard being a public figure, it's almost impossible to win. But these people are scum. If you are willing to just go around and label people as traitors to your country, as working in secret for a foreign adversary, which is a grave crime, especially somebody who has fought in combat and devoted their whole lives to working in your country's military, that is something that ought to be just considered so far beyond the bounds of whatever they think Matt Gaetz and Tulsi Gabbard are. But of course, it's become the primary tactic, in part because the Democrats and neocons who have aligned are using the same tactic that was always the tactic of neocons from the minute I began writing about politics and the war on terror. Anybody who objected to U.S. policy or U.S. wars or any of the assault on civil liberties was declared by the Bill Kristols and David Frums and Dick Cheneys and Donald Rumsfeld of the world of being in the pocket of the terrorists. And this is just a other expression of that same kind of tactic, that if you dissent in any way to the government's policies, you get accused of being disloyal. Even if you're somebody who put your life on the line to fight for your country, it makes no difference. Here's Bill Kristol's site, The Bulwark, which today said, quote, "The curious case of Tulsi Gabbard. Is she a Russian asset or a dupe?" What has Tulsi Gabbard done to even raise this question? Here was John Bolton today on CNN. Now, it's really, I just want to remind people that just like Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney were considered war criminals until about 8 seconds ago when they started praising Kamala Harris, John Bolton was considered such an extremist, such a warmongering sociopath, that even during the first Bush term or the beginning of the second Bush term in the war on terror, when Bush and Cheney were getting everything they wanted, Bush tried to make John Bolton the ambassador to the UN. And the Senate, which was, again, afraid to challenge Bush, especially on national security, was giving him anything he wanted, declared John Bolton over the line. They twice rejected that nomination. And Bolton couldn't get confirmed. And now, just 20 years later, the wise statesman to whom we're all supposed to listen about foreign policy is the very same John Bolton who appeared both on CNN and MSNBC today to opine on the propriety of Trump's choices. Here's what he said on CNN.
Tulsi Gabbard, what are your thoughts this morning?
Well, I thought it was the worst cabinet-level appointment in history until they then heard about the Matt Gaetz appointment. Really, my reaction was that this is like the legend of Caligula, the Roman emperor, who wanted to nominate his horse as a Roman consul. You had to be a Roman senator at the time to be a consul, and it was intended to show how demeaned and degraded the Roman Senate had become. So now we're going to see whether the American Senate can stand up and reject two people who are totally unqualified, unfit professionally, and really lacking in the moral characteristics, the character that you need to hold these jobs. I think this vote should be 100-0 against both of them.
I mean, speaking for myself, if I would have to pick between John Bolton and Tulsi Gabbard running the intelligence apparatus or U.S. foreign policy, I would pick Tulsi Gabbard without giving it the slightest thought. There is nothing that you can do in American corporate media or in American political discourse to get yourself disqualified from being presented as the expert as long as you speak poorly about Donald Trump. I've said this before, and I don't really mean it all that hyperbolically. I really do believe that if in somewhere in Germany, Adolf Hitler were discovered to be alive at the age of whatever, 106, that his suicide was fake, that he just kind of lived in obscurity in Germany, and they found him. As long as he, when he was arrested, said to the media, the German media, you know, one thing that really alarms me is that Donald Trump is about to become president again. I find him unstable and authoritarian. As someone who myself was an authoritarian, I recognize in him what I did. I have a lot of regrets for it. I really do believe he would get an MSNBC contract or a CNN contract and be treated as some sort of wise pundit. That's the only qualification. John Bolton has been not just wrong, but bloodthirsty wrong, disgustingly wrong, completely wrong about every single thing on which he's commented in the past 25 years, and yet here's NBC and CNN holding him up as the conscience of the nation, as the moral arbiter of who should and shouldn't get to serve in the cabinet of the person who just won a massive mandate from the American people. Speaking of people with no business to opine that way, Abigail Spanberger is a Democratic congresswoman from Virginia, but before that she was a lifelong CIA operative. That's why she became a Democratic congresswoman. They were purposely recruiting people from the CIA and the NSA and the FBI because that's what the Democratic Party has become. She decided she wasn't going to run for re-election because she wants to run for governor of Virginia next year. And here's what she had to say about Tulsi Gabbard's choice. Quote, as a former CIA case officer, as though that's supposed to be a credential, I saw the men and women of the U.S. intelligence community put their lives on the line every day for this country, the way Tulsi Gabbard did, but not Abigail Spanberger. And I am appalled at the nomination of Tulsi Gabbard to lead the DNI. Not only is she ill-prepared and unqualified, but she traffics in conspiracy theories and cozies up to dictators like Bashar al-Assad and Vladimir Putin. What conspiracies does Tulsi Gabbard traffic in? You mean things like claiming that the Russians were blackmailing Donald Trump because they had a tape of him urinating on a prostitute in the Ritz-Carlton in Moscow, or that he had conspired with the Russian government to hack into the DNC's email as part of the 2016 election, or that the reporting that the New York Post did was based on fake documents produced by Russia rather than authentic documents. These are the people who spew conspiracy theories all the time. One person who was extremely excited by Abigail Spanberger's denunciation of Tulsi Gabbard was Michael Hayden. And just to remind people of who he is, for those who don't know, Michael Hayden was running the NSA for George Bush and Dick Cheney, and his job was to detect threats to the United States. That's what the intelligence community, especially the NSA, the National Security Agency, is there to do. He was the head of the NSA on the day that 9/11 got attacked. Imagine being the person who failed to detect 9/11 when you have a $100 billion a year intelligence apparatus that you're running. And as a result for that failure, George Bush and Dick Cheney moved him, Michael Hayden, to run the CIA for them. So he has spent years in the darkest bowels of the U.S. security state. And above the Abigail Spanberger tweet saying it's appalling that Tulsi Gabbard was nominated, he said, quote, I worked with you. What can we do? The answer is nothing. You can do nothing. And I think this is such an important point, is that if you really believe, as I do, that the U.S. security state is this subversive, destructive component of our government and in our political life, if you really believe that it is radically abusing its powers to illegally interfere in our politics, to spy on our citizens, to produce propaganda and lies against the core of what it was supposed to be when it was created, something that would never interfere in our politics, these are exactly the kinds of people, Michael Hayden, Abigail Spanberger, John Bolton, who ought to be alarmed and threatened by what Donald Trump is about to do. These are the people who need to be targeted and attacked and uprooted, and all the things that they've done. If Abigail Spanberger and Michael Hayden and John Bolton weren't deeply concerned by Donald Trump's selection of somebody to run the Director of National Intelligence, that would be a very alarming sign. Hear from the Atlantic writer Tom Nichols. So predictable what he's going to say. He replied to a tweet by Gary Kasparov, the former Russian. Gary Kasparov replied to him. Tom Nichols said, quote, "Gabbard has every right to our personal views, however inscrutable they may be, but it's a security risk. Gabbard is a walking Christmas tree of warning lights." And then Kasparov said, "A Russian Orthodox Christmas tree." Do you see how just childish and pathetic these people are? They just run around calling everybody Russian agents without the slightest basis for having any idea why they're even saying it. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.